All right, welcome back, bots and Fimbot. Here we have the third and final member of the Predacon Stooges, Darkscream. A little bit interesting here is that I have, of course, on the left, the Beast War original, and then the Roach in Disguise repaint. Neither of these are actually colored like a realistic animal. With Gas Skunk and Stink Bomb, you'll recall that they are primarily a black skunk with a white or silver stripe. Yes, there's some yellow added in there, and of course they're cyborgs, having some mechanical parts, but the animals are still colored like an actual skunk. In the case of Slapper and Spitter, frogs actually are quite colorful creatures and come in a large variety of colors, especially the tropical variety that one might find, say, in the Amazon. Darkscream is actually supposed to be a flying squirrel. The name is a bit of a misnomer, as squirrels do not actually fly, but in fact glide. Much like a flying fish, if you've actually ever heard of that, which again, fish don't fly either, but are in fact capable of gliding. There's even such a thing as a flying snake. Aren't you glad you don't live in the tropics? But again, these creatures do not fly, despite the name. They in fact glide through a sort of stretched skin that comes from their upper legs and would actually go all the way down to the lower legs, allowing them to, a bit like a parachute, if you will, or a glider. Now, flying squirrels are nocturnal creatures, and they're colored pretty much like other squirrels, brown or perhaps gray. As you can see here, Darkscream is blue, with a sort of gray back, yes, and silver chrome, because again, he's that Transmetal 2 cyborg. But he's primarily, fur is blue. Not, I don't believe, something you find in nature with flying squirrels. Oh, again, I could be wrong. Now, in the case of Night Glider here, his maximal equivalent, I think it's probably more accidental. He's a kind of orange color, but this actually may have meant to have been brown, potentially. It is a bit of a brownish tint, a sort of burnt orange, if you can make it out. And so it may have been a bit of an accident that it ended up being more orange than it should have been. His chrome is also a kind of copper, which is, again, a sort of brownish tone. Although he does have blue fur highlighted along him, so I don't know what to tell you. Now, this is a bit of an interesting aspect of Transmetal 2, so we haven't really had a chance to cover, but you will notice that on both models, there's a sort of an engine detail on the wings. Essentially a sort of VTOL engine, which stands for a vertical takeoff and landing, that some airplanes have that allow them to basically operate like a helicopter. They can hover and instead of being a runway, can land straight up and down. These have been, though, despite the fact they are vehicle components, and Transmetal 2s do not have vehicle modes typically, they are still part of his beast mode. Ironically, despite the fact that flying squirrels cannot fly, Darkscream and Night Glider probably can, at least to a limited degree. Helpful now if you notice these holes that are actually in his parachute skin here. So he actually probably does, in fact, have a flight mode, as if he was a bird or a bat. Just an interesting little tidbit there. The other two that we discussed don't really have vehicle components, as the Transmetal 2s were cyborgs, not vehicleized transformers, for Beast Former, of course. Interestingly enough, the Gas Skunk and Stink Bomb do have exhaust pipes, which I neglected to mention in my review of them. It's part of the chrome along their sides or their shoulders. Darkscream and Night Glider actually have vehicle components here with the VTOL engine, and it's not a vehicle mode or anything like that. It's part of the beast mode. Articulation is very limited, which is an unfortunate thing that occasionally happens with beast transformers, despite the fact that they generally have more articulation than a vehicle transformer. Depending on their beast mode, it can still be quite limited. In Darkscream's case, he actually technically has a shoulder joint here on a ball joint, and again an elbow joint, but as you see, it detaches from the leathery part of him that's supposed to, on the real life animal, is actually attached to the leg and doesn't come off like that. So while you can move it, it kind of spoils the effect. He does have a rear set of legs here, but basically just has a sort of thigh ball joint here and an ankle joint with no actual knee. The tail's on a double hinge, which is actually quite stiff on him, but she does bend, allowing for an up and down motion with the tail, but not side to side. So perhaps it helps him control its elevation, but doesn't really help him with steering. I don't know how much an actual real-life flying squirrel uses its tail for that purpose, but that's generally often what tails are used for creatures that can get airborne. The head, no articulation. Although you can see the mouth is molded open, it has no jaw articulation. The head cannot look side to side, up or down, or anything like that. And obviously with the large parachute-like skin stretched out here, he has no sort of waist bend or equivalent. Interestingly, his teeth are not painted. You know, it's like Slapper and unlike Gas Skunk. If we bring Night Glider back into here, you'll actually see the opposite, or hopefully can make out. They've worn out a little bit, unfortunately, but he actually had white painted teeth. Interesting to note that the Predacons of Robots in the Sky seem to be reversed. One doesn't have its teeth painted, so the other does. In this case, one did have it painted, so the other does not. In the case of Slapper and Spitter, neither of them do. Just an interesting observation. Now, for Darkscream's transformation, the lower body basically just folds out like so. And again, that's pretty much the entire robot mode. Basic Transformers, which is the size class, which I think I neglected to mention the previous two, usually have a very basic, appropriate enough transformation. The head folds here, rotates around, slaps in. The tail simply folds up, making use of that double joint. As you see, he's pretty much in robot mode with you just needing to revolve the head, which unfortunately for me is very, very loose on him. I like to pose the claws here to be up like that, but that's more of just my taste with him. He is a little bit back heavy with this backpack, which gives him a nice sort of back display, but means you kind of have to lean him forward if you want him to stand on his own, or else compromise and fold his tail back down to be sort of third leg, which is not too hard to accomplish. Simply fold it down like so, and he can stand up much easier. Now, Darkscream suffers from a particular syndrome that popped up occasionally with your Transmetal 2s and other Transformers that had spark crystals, and that is open spark crystal syndrome. Literally, for whatever reason, nothing covers his spark crystal here. To be able to make out is, again, that violent pink orb with a Predacon logo inside. So it's completely exposed to the outside world. A stray shot or a purposely aimed sniper shot could easily kill him and take him right out. Why he doesn't have a little door to hinge open and close? Other basic size Transformers, in fact, did in the Transmetal 2 line. Other than just they were too cheap to add it. For articulation, his head is ball jointed as you saw, allowing it to turn to either side to side or even look up. His shoulders are ball jointed. His his elbows are ball jointed. No wrists. His thighs are ball jointed. His knees are ball jointed, and his ankles are ball jointed. So he's actually got very large free range of motion here, and quite a lot of ball joints. Again, remember his beast legs here are also ball jointed, both in the shoulder and elbow. So he's positively ball busting here with ball joints. He makes out even better in the weapon department than his two comrades. The tail is actually a sheath for a not bad looking sword, which he can be armed with. Again, in the show, he actually rarely makes use of this weapon. Possibly partially because the Autobots don't tend to have swords. This is actually an unfortunate aspect of Transformers going all the way back to Beast Wars, in which typically only one side is armed with swords and the other side is not. In Beast Wars, Maximals tended to have swords, or Maximal-aligned Transformers tend to have swords, whereas Predacon units tended to not have swords. This is ditto for Beast Machines, in which the Technorganic Maximals did tend to have swords, but the Viacons did not. Perhaps partially explained because, again, perhaps being Beast Transformers, the Maximals had an emphasis on melee combat, whereas being Vehicular Transformers, the Viacons had an emphasis more on guns and range combat. This is reversed for Robots in Disguise, where the Predacons do have an emphasis on melee combat, but the Autobots tend to be range units. You can see for both the robot modes, their color schemes are actually not too dissimilar with placement of colors, but Darkscream tends to have a more paint applications overall, though not by much. For the name Darkscream, this might be a reference to Starscream, or it could be a reference to Nightscream. Starscream, of course, is a classic character from the original series. but he doesn't really apply to the other two, although he is a flyer to some degree like Starscream. Nightscream, on the other hand, was a Beast Machine character, which had come out, that was a show that came out just before Robots in Disguise, when he was a Beast Flyer Transformer. And so that might be a reference to him. It just might be coincidence. Darkscream actually is kind of a cool name that I don't think has popped up again in Transformers, interestingly enough. Perhaps because of the better-known Starscream, and even Nightscream occasionally name pops up. Color-wise, you can see this, again, while they have the same detail, this area of the pelvis has in fact been colored on Darkscream, where it's just straight up orange on Night Glider. He's also got a little bit of the abdomen's painted silver, where his are just orange to match the rest of his body. Not as much. Far more head detail on Darkscream. The face is purple, but the sort of helmet around it is blue, with a blue dot even in the middle there, and yellow eyes. Interestingly, again, the teeth are not painted on him, unless I've accidentally rubbed them off over the years. Night Glider, on the hand, is almost a vampiric look, straight up dark blue with only that orange dart and mouth, with actually does have, if you can make out, white painted teeth, and of course the red eyes. Now, a nice little feature, which is unfortunately often underestimated in Transformers, is the fact that their weapons, while they can hold them, don't have to be held in robot mode. You can actually leave the weapon sheathed, if you like. This is arguably not a necessary feature, but it's one I always appreciate. That my Transformer doesn't have to look like he's always constantly about to go into battle, but can in fact store his weapon away if he likes to, and thus affect a more casual pose. Slapper and Spitter actually can do this as well. The storage in their beast mode, the little hole the tongue club peg could go into, ends up on the back plate, unless you use it as a chest plate. And the tongue club can actually be stored at roughly the waist or waist equivalent area. And that's a nice little feature when they include it. Again, a sign of quality craftsmanship, which is always very much appreciated when it comes up. Now, for Darkscream, again, as I have said before several times, the Predacon Stooges are basically interchangeable personality-wise. They're all cowards. They all suck up to Megatron. They're all incompetent bumblers. What separates Darkscream from the group really is the fact that he is technically a flyer. Robots in Disguise, at least the American translation, seems to never quite make up its mind whether Darkscream is an actual flyer or not. At least in one episode, Darkscream will claim that he is in fact a non-flyer who can only glide. However, he's often shown genuinely flying, at least a sort of a low-level flight. Personally, I've always considered both Night Glider and Darkscream to be flyers. Not as capable of aerial combat as a true flyer, which would be a Transformer whose alt mode actually is a flight mode, like a jet fighter or a bird. But I did still nevertheless consider them to be low altitude level flyers. And in my opinion, Darkscream was probably hoping to bluff his way out when he claimed not to be a actual flyer. Again, remember, he's got VTOL engines, at least in his beast mode. In robot mode, arguably, they're not as useful since they're sideways now. It may be he's not capable of flight in robot mode, as most flyer units are, unless it's beast machines. But at least in beast mode, he is capable of that low-level altitude flight. Beyond that, that is really Darkscream's only unique attribution to the team, is that he is capable of that limited flight. Other than that, he's not significantly different than the others, and unfortunately, goes through no character arc. As I've mentioned before, Robots in Disguise doesn't really have any personal story for most of its characters. Really with only one or two exceptions, and only the most bare bones of a story or character arc, given to them. We'll address those characters when we come to them. But the three Predacons, they are exactly as they were introduced in Battle Protocol, and remain that way throughout the entire series, unfortunately. So, thank you for joining me again, and we are at last finally done with the three Predacon Stooges.
We now return to the Transformers.
I thought it might be nice to get a group shot of the Three Stooges before we finish with them forever. Wait a minute. Something's not quite right. Let me see if I can fix this. There, that's better. There's actually one episode where Sideburn refers to this. It sounds like he says Attack of the Clones. I believe the actual line is Attack of the Clowns, again referring to the Three Stooges' nature. But Attack of the Clones would have been the perfect reference. This episode actually had come out only shortly after the second Star Wars prequel, Attack of the Clones. And it would be a excellent reference to the fact that these three guys are in fact repaints, clones almost, if you will, of previous Beast War Transformers. Again, I often wondered how Megatron managed to become the ruler of many worlds if he only has 3 Predacons under his command and they are as incompetent and cowardly as these 3. You might say Megatron was lying, except Optimus actually agrees with this statement, saying that Megatron has in fact ravaged countless worlds. Perhaps he's lost all of his best troops along the way, or rewarded them by making them governors of the planets that he conquered. I don't know. Again, Robots in the Skies was a silly kids show, and they didn't put much thought, unfortunately, into the backstory. Well, I want to thank you, bots and fembots, for joining me for this review, and I will see you next time.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shore of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10,000 gate. All those moments we lost in time, like tears in rain.
Congratulations, Darkscream! You just won the prize for most obnoxious life form!
Flattery will get you nowhere, Autobot! Beast mode!